Hey guys, welcome to the third lesson on WCF using C#. Today's lesson is just going to be about exposing a metadata exchange endpoint. Now, I talked about this concept before in the last video, but in this video I'm going to talk about it more formally and explain why sometimes we want to build WCF applications, why we'll want to do that, and use a metadata exchange port instead of doing it how we did it in this example. So, to start off, we are using the same exact example from the last video. So if you didn't do the last video, which was building your first WCF application, we're going to be just using that and converting it into using a metadata exchange port. And I'll explain what that is in a second, but let me just run the program so we can see what it looked like. So before we had the server getting created right here, and it says server is open, and then we had our client application, which is over here, and it says enter go to get the data. This just gets the product numbers of all the products that we have. I think it's all, I don't know, I forget what we did. But yes, here's the product numbers, and that's the first thing you can do. And the second thing you can do is you can enter a product number to get more specific information about a particular item. So let's go ahead and pick a random item. Let's say BK-R19BF58. So I've hit enter now. I'm going to get I think there's 4 more pieces of information, or 3 more pieces of information about this. Now, I can get all the information I want, but this was just for testing purposes. So by doing this, I can get specific information about about a product. So if I hit enter, now we can see what happens. I get the color, which is black. I get the price of it, the name of it, and the product number once again. So that was the product number that we typed in, and we got the information. Okay, so now let's quickly talk about what is a metadata exchange endpoint and why do we want to use it. So how this application was set up and how I'm most likely going to do the applications from going forward, because I like this method, like I said before. Basically, because I am the creator or programmer of both the service and the client, meaning I'm creating both ends of this application, meaning I have access to all the information I need. So because of that, I created a product interfaces project which contains the information that the client needs from the server. Now, that information consists of the service contract, which the service contract just says to the client what functions the service has available to the client that the client can perform. So because of this service contract, the client is able to know that, okay, the server has a function called list products and has a function called get product. Now, all that the client sees is the interface or the service contract. It does not actually see the implementation. So the client doesn't know how the service is actually implementing the list products function. Rather, all it knows is that the service has a function called list products that will most likely return what it's intended to do, whatever the name implies. That's all that the client knows. So because of that, I own the client and the service. I use this interface because I can just attach this interface to my project, my client project, and then if I'm shipping out my client project to people to use, they'll have that interface attached to it automatically, so it will know what the server can do. I personally like this method. Now, however, let's say we're just building the service of an application, or we're connecting to someone else's service. So, for example, let's say the second scenario, let's say we want to create an application, maybe a phone app, an iPhone app, whatever, which we will cover eventually on this YouTube channel. But let's say we want to create an iPhone application that queries Amazon's products database or gets the products that Amazon sells on their website. How would I do that? Now, granted, I'm not sure if Amazon has this. I'm pretty sure they do. If Amazon has a service available, where like how it's set up like this, what they can do is they could expose a metadata exchange port, and that allows us to make our clients connect to their service beforehand, download the information that it needs from the service, like the service contract and any other class information, like kind of like how we have this product data. We'll talk about this in a second, but so it downloads any necessary information that it needs in order to connect to it. So basically, if I don't have access, if I'm not the creator of both the service and the client, this is something that I should look into, because this gets the information that the client needs right when in the beginning of it, rather than actually having the actual interface implementation, like how without having the actual interface like we have. So once again, if we were building a service and not the client, we're building a service that just gets information from our databases, and we want people to be able to build applications that connect to our service and get information from our database. We would set up the service and expose a metadata exchange port, and that will allow people to connect to our service beforehand when they're building their own applications and get the information that they need to connect to it and to utilize it. So that's going to be the exchange, the service contract, and some other information, which I'll talk about in a second. It also has a bunch of other information that we'll look at. So, in order to do this, I first want to, from the client, and pretty sure, do I want to remove from the service also? Does this have products interfaces? Yeah, I'm going to remove. Okay. So, before we start, I'm going to remove the products interfaces reference from both the client and the service. I'm going to leave it there because we're going to be using this in later lessons. I don't want to delete it. So I'm just going to remove the reference to it from my client and my service, because we're not going to use it. We're going to pretend it isn't there anymore by removing these references to it. We're going to get errors from this, but we'll fix those, don't worry. So I'm pretending this product interface is not there anymore, so I'm just going to minimize it. So now we're only dealing with the client and the service. We don't need the interfaces anymore. Let's go ahead and try to compile this and just try to remove the errors. Alright, so this first error is because it's the service contract. So I'm just going to create the service contract in the service rather than doing it. Let me comment this out. Rather than do from the interface. So I'm just going to take this, drag this into the services, do that, change the namespace on this. Now this is all just setting everything up. Service contract, product data, we'll also grab that. Put that in there. Product data, change that. Okay. Close, save. Okay, so we're not using product interfaces. I'm taking product interfaces out of the picture because our client is not gonna be using that anymore. So I'm putting the service contract in our product data class inside of the product service. Okay, so what else? What other errors do we have? Oh, this is our product client. We'll leave those errors in for now. We don't want to deal with that. We'll look at that in a second. Okay, so we'll fix the errors in a little bit once we set everything up. So the next thing I want to do is I want to create or expose this metadata exchange port. And this is what the client is going to use to get its information about the service contract and things like that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to right click on app config and we're going to hit edit WCF configuration just like we did before. So what we're going to do is in the advanced section, go to service behaviors, and inside of this we're going to hit new service behavior configuration. We're going to name it, what should we name it? We'll just name it service behavior right now. Like that. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to hit add to add a behavior, and there's a bunch of behaviors that we can use, but we're going to choose to service metadata. This is what we need for our behavior. We'll hit add on that, and it gets added right here, as you can see. So the next thing we need to do is now we need to now that we created the behavior, now we need to go ahead and attach it to our service. So we're going to go into our services. We're going to click on our product service. WCF product service is what you should have also. We're going to go to the behavior configuration, and we're going to set this to our service behavior that we just created. So now that we create the behavior, we attach the behavior to our service, now we need to actually host it and enable, we need to create an endpoint for this. We need to expose the metadata exchange to an endpoint. So we need to create a new endpoint. So we're going to go into our endpoints. Look, we already have one endpoint. Remember creating this endpoint? This endpoint is for actually connecting to it, basic HTTP binding. We're going to create a new service endpoint. This endpoint, we can give it a name. I'm going to call it Metadata Exchange or MEX. What else? We need to set the binding. The binding is going to be to MEX HTTP binding. We're going to set the contract to Metadata Exchange, which is a built-in contract. And then the last thing we're going to do, we're going to set an address. We could set a base address, and I don't think we really didn't talk about that yet. So I'm going to set an address, and I'm going to say it's HTTP localhost port 9999. I think what we did, MEX. So that'll be my address for this. So we're going to go ahead and hit save and exit, and we'll look at our app config file. And you can see that our behavior was created. We attached it to our service as a behavior configuration, which exposes the service metadata. And then we create an endpoint for the metadata exchange. Oh, we have an error here because we changed it to our local one. That should fix that. Let's see. Okay, we'll look at that in a second. All right, so now that we have our metadata exchange port, now on our client, we can actually connect to it and it will get the information that it needs. So to do that, let's go ahead and close all this. We're first going to, actually, wait, hold on. We need to first host our service so that it can connect to the client. So we need to first get all the errors out of our service. So let's see, I forget which ones are in our service. This is all program.cs. Okay, actually, we're good. So we're going to go ahead and host our service. So I'm going to just select our product service to be hosted by itself. I'm going to run that, and we have an error, of course. Oh, okay, it can't find the WCF contract. Hold on, let's see what's wrong. WCF product service contract in the product service namespace. We'll just specify the namespace. Maybe that's the problem. Yeah, that's product service. Let's try that. Okay, that looks better. That's great. Now let's run it. Okay, now we have our service running. And I run it as not in debug mode. I did that for a reason so that I can use the client. So my service is running. Now on my client, this is where we're going to create the proxy. We're going to create this connection to the service through its metadata exchange. So we're going to right click on my products client. I'm going to go to add service reference. So inside of the add service reference, we're going to type HTTP localhost port 9999/MEX. That's what we did. So I'll hit that. So that's the address of the metadata exchange. We're adding the server reference. We're going to hit go. Once you hit go, you'll see that it detects the metadata exchange on my WCF product service. If I were to close this and try this again, as you can see, now we won't see it. So that's one downfall to using this method. In order to connect and get the information from the service for the metadata exchange, we need to have the service running. So let's fix that. Let's run this again. So now the service is running. Now I'll add a service reference. Mix. Go. We have now we see it. We can call it whatever we want. I'm just going to leave it as service reference 1 for now. Hit OK. Now this is generating all the code that it needs to get all the information that it needs for the service, even though it's not fully there yet. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So now that we create the service reference, see we have service reference 1 inside of program. Now we can fix some of these errors, at least. We can fix some of them. So instead of creating channels and doing it this way, because we have the service reference set up like this, using the built-in methods, we can just create a proxy to it easier than actually having to create the channel. And all we have to do for this is, I'm going to comment this out. I think so. It's service reference 1 dot. We'll need to look at that in a second. But we have WCF product service client. We'll create that. We'll say proxy equals new. So now we have our proxy like this. So remember we called it service reference 1. Now we have our proxy. Now I can try going proxy dot. And now, as you can see, we have our function. So we see get product and list products. It automatically also creates asynchronous versions of those for us that are awaitable, and you can use those if you want. So we have our two list products and get products. Now, I'm just looking at this right now, and I'm seeing a problem. This is actually a good thing to point out. Right now, how it's set up, the proxy created the return type as by default to a string array instead of a list of string. And we can change that by going into the settings. So if I go to my service reference 1 and I right click on it and I hit configure service reference, we can see some information. So as you can see, we have allow generation of asynchronous operations. So we have that there. But then we have some data types, and boom, collection type is system.array. I can change that to system.collections.generic.list. And that's what I want. I want a list because I built it like that. Hit OK. And as you can see, the error for that has went away because now it's returning as a list of string. So we're almost there. We're getting there. Why is console having a problem? Oh, that's because I didn't finish this. Okay. Okay, so the last thing we have to do to get this working is we need to deal with product data right here. And because of how this is set up, and I'll explain what I mean by this. Basically, this product data class automatically comes in the package because it was hosted in the product service. Because it lives in the product service. So WCF is smart enough to include this inside of the metadata exchange. So if can I resolve this? Yeah, if I right click on this and resolve saying using products client as service reference 1, now I have access to it because we can see inside of service reference 1 we have the product data class in there. Now up until .NET 3.5, I think, we had to, as WCF programmers, we had to, inside of our product data class, we had to mark this class with certain attributes. The class had to be marked with data contract, and all the properties and things inside of them had to be marked with data member. They're both attributes. And the reason that we did those was basically it just told WCF that these are going to be serialized it helps WCF serializing this to be sent over the wire. But now, by default, it automatically detects it, and it will serialize these for you. So we don't actually need to specify the attributes for this. Now, there are some benefits of specifying them, and you can look those up. If you do want to specify them, you can specify order of serialization and things like that, and some other things. I would look that up if you're interested. Yeah, so we don't have to specify them right now. If we did, it wouldn't hurt. So now that we have that, everything is good. We can go ahead and run this project now. Service is open. Enter go. So we got go. And then BB7421. Hit enter, and we get the information that we need. So just a quick recap of what's going on here. Basically, in this example, my client does not have the service contract. It doesn't have the products data. This whole class called products data inside of the client was created for us when we set up the proxy using the service reference. When I host a service and I host a metadata exchange port like we did, it's basically sending all this information to the client when we try to get that information, and the proxy is creating the service contract for us, and it's creating this products data class. This doesn't exist in the client. We aren't referencing anything that has it. Before, we were referencing product interfaces, and product interfaces had a class called product data. That's why it worked. But using this metadata exchange, it creates it for us automatically, which is really cool. So that's one cool thing about this. What else? So, if we are building, this is a recap, if we are building an application or service that's going to be used by other people, this is a good way to go. Or if we're trying to build a client application and we're trying to connect to somewhere else, this is what's happening. The service is exposing this kind of endpoint for us to get the information. Okay, so that is basically it for this video. I just wanted to show you guys that there's different ways to do this, and using this metadata exchange is a good way if you are connected to a service or you don't own both the service and the client. I personally like using the other method and having the client and the service just share the same project that contains the data that's needed, because using this method, the data has to be sent over the internet, and I don't like doing this. I don't know. I just like the other way better. But this is a nice method because of the power behind it. So that's it for this video. If you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comment, and thanks for watching.